Ambassador walked into the grand chamber with her head held high. She had prepared for weeks, ready to discuss humanity's trade agreements and cultural programs. The chamber was massive, with seats arranged in circles that rose toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond. Representatives from 200 species filled those seats, their forms ranging from crystalline beings that chimed when they moved to massive creatures that needed special platforms to hold their weight. The Keeper of Records stood at the center, a tall figure wrapped in robes that seemed to shift between colors. Had met the Keeper before during formal occasions, but today something felt different. The usual cheerful chaos of the millennial census review had given way to an unusual quiet. "We gather to celebrate another 1,000 years of cooperation," the Keeper announced, their voice carrying perfectly to every corner of the chamber. "Each species has contributed to our shared civilization. Today, we honor those contributions." Relaxed slightly. This was the ceremony she expected. Species would present their achievements, receive acknowledgement, and everyone would share a meal afterward. She had her speech ready about humanity's agricultural innovations and artistic exchanges. The Keeper continued through the standard categories. The had made breakthroughs in medical technology. The had established 17 new trading routes. The had composed symphonies that now played across the galaxy. Each announcement received polite applause. Then the Keeper paused. "This year, we introduce a new category to our review. The Universal Sacrifice Registry has been monitoring voluntary deaths during emergency situations across all member species for the past 2 centuries." Felt a flutter of confusion. She had never heard of such a registry. Around the chamber, other ambassadors shifted in their seats, equally puzzled. "The registry tracks individuals who voluntarily gave their lives to save others during disasters, accidents, and emergencies. We felt it was time to recognize this ultimate form of service." The holographic display at the chamber's center flickered to life, showing numbers and charts. Squinted at them, trying to understand what she was seeing. "The data covers 207 species across 12,000 registered incidents," the Keeper said. "The distribution is unexpected." The chart showed a massive red bar that dwarfed all others. Next to it, humanity's symbol glowed. His breath caught in her throat. "Humanity represents 0.003% of the galactic population," the Keeper continued. "They have been members of this council for only 187 years, yet they account for 67% of all volunteer emergency deaths in the registry." The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped in dozens of languages, translators struggling to keep up. Stared at the numbers, convinced there had been a mistake. 67%. That couldn't be right. "Impossible," shouted Ambassador, or his scales rattling with agitation. "The data must be corrupted. No species could have such numbers." "I assure you, the data has been multiple times," the Keeper replied calmly. "Perhaps the Council would like to review specific cases." The display changed, showing individual incidents. Watched with growing horror and pride as case after case appeared. A human firefighter named had remained in a burning building on Colony 7, guiding trapped families to safety even as the structure collapsed around him. He died ensuring the last child made it out. Another case showed engineer who had manually sealed a reactor breach on Station 4. The radiation levels were immediately lethal, but she stayed at the controls for 8 minutes, long enough for the automated systems to engage and save 3,000 station residents. The cases continued. Pilot James Wu, who kept his failing shuttle steady during a crash landing, giving his passengers time to reach emergency pods while he rode the shuttle into the ground. Medic Sarah, who gave her pressure suit to an injured during a station decompression, dying in vacuum while ensuring her patients survived. "This is madness," whispered Ambassador of the seated near. "Why would they do this?" Wanted to answer but found she couldn't. She had known humans died in the line of duty. She had attended memorial services, but she had never realized humanity stood out in this way. She had thought all species had firefighters who sometimes didn't make it out, medics who died treating patients, pilots who went down with their ships. The keeper displayed more statistics. The pattern holds across all emergency categories. In shipboard disasters, humans are 400 times more likely to volunteer to stay behind. In medical emergencies, humans give up life-saving equipment to others at rates we cannot even compare to other species. In rescue operations, humans consistently place themselves in lethal danger to extract others. They must be forced, declared Ambassador, their tentacles waving in distress. Their government must mandate this behavior. No one volunteers for death. Each case was investigated, the keeper said. Every individual acted of their own choice. Many were off-duty. Some weren't even emergency personnel. They were simply present when disaster struck. The display showed a human merchant named David Park, who had been shopping at a market when a transport crashed into the building. He had held up a collapsed beam for 47 seconds, allowing others to escape before his strength gave out. He was 63 years old and had no emergency training. He had simply seen people trapped and acted. Felt tears on her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, aware that the entire chamber was now looking at her. Ambassador, the keeper said gently, can you explain this pattern? She stood slowly, her mind racing. How could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? She thought about her own childhood on Earth, about the stories she had been told, about firefighters and soldiers and ordinary people who had faced impossible choices. I don't know if I can explain it, she said finally. We tell stories about sacrifice. We honor those who give their lives for others, but I never thought we were different. I thought everyone did this. They do not, said, her voice cold with something that might have been fear. They optimize for survival. We train our people to preserve their own lives first because a living person can help others later. A dead person helps no one. That's logical, said. That makes sense. Yet humans do the opposite. Looked at the display, at the names and faces scrolling past. So many names. So many ordinary people who had made extraordinary choices. Maybe we're not logical about it, she admitted. But when someone is trapped and dying, when you have seconds to decide, I think most humans don't think about logic. They think about the person who needs help. They think about families going home. They think that if someone has to die, better it be them than someone else. That is not survival instinct, Ambassador said. That is the opposite of survival instinct. I know, said quietly. The chamber fell silent again. Could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could sense the confusion and concern radiating from the assembled species. She had come here to discuss trade routes. Now she stood as a representative of a species that apparently threw their lives away with terrifying frequency. The Council must investigate this further, declared. We cannot simply accept that one species is inherently self-destructive. There must be an explanation. Cultural conditioning, perhaps, genetic anomaly, something that can be understood and potentially addressed. Addressed? Asked sharply. You want to stop humans from saving people. We want to understand why humans keep dying, replied. If this is a psychological disorder, it may be treatable. Wanted to argue, but the keeper raised a hand for silence. The Council has spoken. An investigation will be conducted. Ambassador, Earth will receive a delegation to study this phenomenon. We must understand if humanity's behavior represents a threat to themselves or others. A threat, his voice rose. They died saving people. How is that a threat? A species that does not value its own survival is unpredictable, or said. If humans will die for strangers, what will they do for causes they believe in? What wars might they fight without counting the cost? The implications hung in the air. Felt a chill run down her spine. She had come to celebrate humanity's contributions. Instead, She had watched as the galaxy realized that humans were willing to die in ways that other species found incomprehensible. The session ended in chaos, with ambassadors arguing among themselves, some defending humanity and others demanding restrictions. Walked out of the chamber in a daze, already composing the message she would have to send to Earth. The government would need to prepare for an investigation. They would need to explain something that herself didn't fully understand. That night, alone in her quarters, she pulled up the full registry database. She scrolled through names and incidents, reading stories of courage and sacrifice that spanned nearly 2 centuries of human presence in space. Teachers who had shielded alien students during attacks, maintenance workers who had stayed behind to keep systems running during evacuations, parents who had given their children spots on rescue ships to alien families. She thought about what it said, that humans had an empathy override mechanism, that they valued others above themselves to a degree unknown in galactic civilization. Wasn't sure if that was right. She only knew that when she read these stories, she felt proud and heartbroken in equal measure. Humanity had gone to the stars hopping to find their place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. They had found it, but now wondered if that place would be one of honor or quarantine, respect or fear. The investigation would determine humanity's future in the Galactic Council. And somewhere out in the black, humans continued their work on stations and ships and colonies, unaware that the galaxy had just discovered their secret, unaware that their willingness to sacrifice themselves had become the subject of debate and concern across 200 worlds. Looked at the stars beyond her window and hoped that humanity could make the galaxy understand. But she wasn't sure how to explain something that seemed to be woven into the human heart itself. The delegation arrived on Earth 3 weeks later. Investigator led a team of 12 specialists from 6 different species, all chosen for their expertise in psychology, sociology, and cultural analysis. They came expecting to find evidence of mass psychological conditioning or perhaps genetic defects that impaired survival instincts. They came prepared to document a species-wide mental illness. Instead, they found themselves sitting in a small apartment in Chicago, drinking tea with an elderly woman named Tors. "My son was on the Morning Star," said, her hand steady as she poured. "He was the chief engineer. When the coolant system failed, he could have made it to the escape pods. The logs show he had almost 2 minutes." Watched the woman carefully, looking for signs of the grief and trauma she expected. But he chose to stay and repair the system. He chose to stay so the 342 people on that ship could live, corrected gently, including 78 if I remember the manifest correctly. Felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She had reviewed the Morning Star incident. It was one of the cases that had caught the council's attention. Engineer Martin Tors had manually replaced a ruptured coolant line in a chamber flooded with toxic gas. He had kept working even as the poison destroyed his lungs, communicating instructions to the bridge until his final breath. The ship had made it to port safely. "You must be angry," said. "Your government should have had better safety protocols. Your son should have been protected." Smiled sadly. "Should there have been better protocols? Yes, probably, but Martin didn't die because of protocols. He died because people needed help and he could give it. I'm not happy he's gone. I miss him every day, but I'm not angry at him for the choice he made." "You believe he was right to die?" "I believe he was right to save those lives," said carefully. "The dying part was just what it cost." The delegation spent days interviewing families. They met fathers who had lost daughters, wives who had lost husbands, children who had lost parents. They expected to find resentment or at least incomprehension. Instead, they found a consistent pattern. Grief, yes. Sorrow, absolutely. But also understanding. Pride. A sense that their loved ones had died in a way that mattered. One young man named Wei told them about his mother who had been a medic during the station disaster. She had 3 doses of anti-radiation medicine. She gave them all to patients. I was angry at first. I was 17. I thought she chose strangers over me. But she didn't choose strangers over me. She chose to save 3 lives instead of 1. Does that make the loss easier? Asked one of the delegation members, a psychologist named Aura. No, Wei said honestly, but it makes it mean something. Struggled to process these conversations. In culture, unnecessary death was the ultimate failure. They mourned losses, but they also analyzed what went wrong, how the death could have been prevented, what systems had failed. The idea that a death could be both preventable and justified made no sense to her. She turned to studying human media and history. The delegation's analysts pulled millions of files, looking for patterns. What they found was overwhelming. Every human culture had stories about sacrifice. Ancient texts spoke of warriors who held narrow passes against armies, buying time for their people to flee. Religious texts praised those who gave their lives for others. Literature was filled with characters who made ultimate sacrifices. Even children's stories featured heroes who faced death to save others. It's cultural conditioning, declared Aura during one of their evening analysis sessions. They teach this behavior from childhood. We can recommend educational reforms. But wasn't convinced. She had studied the materials too carefully. The sacrifice narratives weren't consistent across cultures. Some emphasized duty, others love, others honor. Some were religious, others secular. Yet the underlying pattern remained the same. The idea that some things were worth dying for appeared independently across human history in cultures that had no contact with each other. It's not taught, she said slowly. Or rather, it is taught, but I think it's taught because it already exists in them. The stories reflect something deeper. To test her hypothesis, designed a series of experiments. She recruited human volunteers and presented them with complex ethical scenarios while monitoring their neural activity. The scenarios were hypothetical but detailed. A building is collapsing. You can save 5 people if you hold a door, but you'll be trapped inside. A ship is failing. You can repair it if you enter a radioactive chamber, but the exposure will kill you. A child is drowning in a dangerous current. You can save them, but you likely won't make it back to shore. The results disturbed the delegation. Time and again, human volunteers chose self-sacrifice when it would save others. Their brain patterns showed genuine conviction, not social performance. The decision-making happened rapidly, often in seconds, and the neural activity showed something that had never seen in studies of other species. When humans contemplated saving others at cost to themselves, the same brain regions lit up that activated for kin protection in most species. But in humans, this activation occurred for strangers, for hypothetical people they would never meet, even for aliens. They've generalized kin protection to all sentient beings, explained to her team. Most species show strong protective instincts for their offspring, moderate instincts for their family groups, and minimal instincts for strangers. Humans show strong protective instincts for everyone. That's evolutionary suicide, Aura said flatly. A species can't survive if its members keep dying for strangers. Yet they have survived, pointed out. They've thrived, actually. Their population growth is standard, their colonies are stable, their society functions normally despite this pattern. She pulled up more data. Look at this. The humans who sacrifice themselves are mourned, but they're also celebrated. Their communities honor them. Their families receive support. And critically, their sacrifice inspires others to be more cooperative, more helpful, more willing to take risks for the common good. The species pays a cost in individual deaths, but gains a benefit in social cohesion. You're suggesting it's an evolutionary strategy, asked another team member. I'm suggesting it might be, said carefully. Or perhaps it's a side effect of something else. Humans have unusually strong empathy responses. They can imagine themselves in others' positions very vividly. When they see someone in danger, perhaps their brain treats it as if they themselves were in danger. And then their protective instincts kick in, even though the person they're protecting is someone else. She worked late into the night, compiling her findings. The more she learned, the more complicated the picture became. Human sacrifice wasn't mindless or suicidal. The people who volunteered weren't depressed or seeking death. They were ordinary people who, when faced with impossible choices, consistently chose to value other lives as much as or more than their own. The delegation visited hospitals next, interviewing emergency personnel. They rode along with firefighters and paramedics. They observed search and rescue training. Everywhere they went, they saw the same thing: humans preparing to risk their lives for others. Humans treating danger to others as danger to themselves. Humans who spoke casually about acceptable risks and necessary sacrifices. A firefighter named Jackson Cole told them, "Look, we all hope to go home at the end of our shift. But if it comes down to me or someone trapped in a building, I'm going to get them out. That's the job. That's the whole job, really." "But you could die," Aura said. "Yeah," Jackson agreed. "But they'd definitely die if I didn't try, so trying is better. Even if trying kills you." Jackson looked confused by the question. "If I die getting someone out, that's one death instead of two. That's better math, isn't it?" Found herself spending long hours at coffee shops, watching ordinary humans go about their lives. She saw nothing unusual. People laughed and argued and worried about mundane things. They complained about traffic and weather. They showed the same petty concerns and small joys as any species. And yet these same people, when faced with emergencies, would make choices that other species found incomprehensible. She interviewed psychologists and philosophers, seeking deeper understanding. One philosopher named Doctor explained it this way: "We're aware of our own mortality. We know we're going to die eventually. I think that makes some humans decide that if death is inevitable, it should at least mean something. Dying to save others gives death a purpose it wouldn't otherwise have." "Do you believe that?" asked. "I don't know," Doctor said honestly. "I'd like to think I'd be brave enough to make that choice if I faced it, but you never really know until the moment comes. What I do know is that humans have always told ourselves stories about meaningful deaths, about sacrifices that mattered. Maybe we need those stories. Maybe they help us face the fact that we all die anyway." 6 weeks into the investigation, compiled her final report. She sat in her temporary office, looking at the document on her screen. It was thorough and detailed, full of data and analysis. But she knew it wouldn't satisfy the council. They wanted a simple answer, a cause they could identify and possibly correct. Instead, she was going to tell them that humanity possessed something unprecedented in galactic civilization, an empathy response so powerful it could override self-preservation, a capacity to value other lives equally to their own, a willingness to die for others that appeared to be woven into the fabric of human cognition and culture. "They're not sick," she wrote in her conclusion. "They're not suicidal. They're not being coerced. Humans possess an empathy override mechanism that allows concern for others to supersede survival instincts to a degree unknown in any other species. This trait appears to be both genetic and cultural, reinforced over thousands of years of evolution and storytelling. It represents a fundamental difference in how humans process moral choices." She paused, then added, "This trait makes humans dangerous in ways the Council has not yet considered, but it also makes them valuable in ways we have not appreciated. A species that will die for strangers will also live for them, fight for them, sacrifice comfort and resources for them. If humanity can be understood and properly integrated into galactic civilization, they may represent our greatest asset in times of crisis." The report spread through the council like fire through dry grass. Some species were moved by the findings. Others were more frightened than ever. The debate raged for weeks. Some council members called for restrictions on human activities, for monitoring and controls. Others argued for embracing humanity's unique qualities. Ambassador found herself in the middle of endless meetings, trying to explain her species to beings who couldn't understand how humans thought. She showed them videos of human history, of firefighters and medics and soldiers. She shared stories of ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. "We're not trying to die," she explained over and over. "We're trying to live in a way that means something. We're trying to protect the people around us. We just don't see much difference between protecting ourselves and protecting others. They're all lives. They all matter." Until Station 77 changed everything. The station was one of the largest diplomatic hubs in the galaxy, a massive structure that housed 200,000 beings from 60 different species. It orbited a gas giant in a system chosen specifically for its political neutrality. Delegations met there to negotiate treaties. Families lived there while working for various galactic organizations. Students studied at its prestigious academy. It was a symbol of cooperation and peace. Was there, presenting her findings to a committee of council members. She had spent the morning answering questions about her investigation, defending her conclusions, trying to make them understand what she had learned about humanity. The alarm cut through her presentation like a knife. Warning lights flashed red throughout the conference room. The station's AI spoke in a calm voice that somehow made the message more terrifying. "Catastrophic containment failure in antimatter reactor 7. Total station breach in 12 minutes. Evacuation protocols now in effect." The room erupted into chaos. His first thought was coldly logical, as befitted a. The nearest fleet was 40 minutes away. The station's own ships couldn't evacuate 200,000 people in 12 minutes, not even close. They might save 20,000 if everything went perfectly. She pulled up the station's schematic on her tablet as she ran toward the evacuation points with the others. The antimatter reaction was cascading, feeding on itself. Nothing could stop it. In 12 minutes, the station would simply cease to exist, converted into energy along with everyone still aboard. She thought of the human stories she had studied, the firefighters who didn't make it out, the engineers who stayed at their posts. She understood them better now, but understanding didn't make facing her own death any easier. The corridors were packed with people moving in organized panic. Security personnel directed traffic, keeping the evacuation orderly. Children cried. Adults called out for family members. Let herself be swept along with the crowd, her mind still working through the mathematics of death. Then her tablet chimed with a priority message. She glanced at it, still walking. "Freighter determination to station control. We might have a solution. Need immediate authorization for reactor approach." Stopped moving. People flowed around her like water around a stone. She pulled up the ship registry with shaking hands. The Determination was a human cargo vessel docked for routine resupply. Crew complement, 8. They hauled agricultural equipment and manufactured goods along the outer rim routes. Nothing special. Nothing that could help with an antimatter reaction. She accessed the communication channel, her investigator credentials giving her override authority. "This is Investigator. What solution?" A woman's voice answered, steady and professional. "Captain Sarah, Determination. We're carrying a prototype containment field generator. Old Earth military tech that never went into production. Supposed to dampen antimatter reactions for safe disposal. It might buy enough time for the evacuation." Might, the captain admitted. "But it's better than nothing. Problem is, the field has to be positioned manually. The antimatter storm is creating too much interference for remote operation or AI control. Someone has to fly into the reactor chamber and hold position while the field does its work." Felt her blood turn cold. She had seen the sensor readings from the reactor. The radiation alone would kill anything biological in seconds. The heat and pressure would tear apart any ship not specifically designed for such conditions. And the Determination was a freighter, not a specialized reactor vessel. "You can't survive that," she said. There was a pause on the other end. Then Captain said quietly, "I know. So you're proposing suicide?" I'm proposing saving 200,000 people, the captain corrected. The suicide part is just what it costs. Heard Tor's voice in her memory, the same words, the same quiet acceptance. She looked around at the crowded corridor, at the thousands of people trying to reach escape pods, at the families struggling to keep their children together, at the elderly couple helping each other walk, at the young students holding hands as they moved. 200,000 lives, 8 human lives. The math was brutally simple. You have authorization, heard herself say. I'm transmitting override codes now. Thank you, Captain said. We'll do our best. The connection closed, stood frozen for a moment, then started running. Not toward the evacuation points, but toward the observation deck. She had to see this. She had to witness what was about to happen. The deck was nearly empty. Most people focused on escaping rather than watching. Pressed against the transparent aluminum viewport, her tablet showing her the determination's position overlaid on the view of the station's reactor section. The freighter was moving, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. It detached from its dock and swung around the station's central axis, orienting toward the reactor section where energy readings were climbing toward catastrophic levels. Captain said into her tablet, knowing the captain could hear her on the open emergency channel. Your crew, did you order them to stay? I didn't order anyone anything, the captain replied. Her voice was strained now, probably from the acceleration. I explained what we could do and what it would cost. They volunteered, every single one of them, in about 30 seconds. Why? Because there are 200,000 people on this station, said a younger voice, male, probably barely out of his teens. And 8 of us. The math isn't complicated. The determination dove toward the reactor section. Watched the ship grow smaller as it approached the glowing wound in the station's side, where the antimatter reaction was tearing through containment after containment. Her tablet showed her the crew roster. Captain Sarah, 43 years old, First Officer, 37, Engineer, 41, Pilot James, 23, Navigator, 35, Medic David Park, 51, Cargo Specialist Maria Santos, 29, Communications Officer Wei, 26. 8 names, 8 humans who had minutes to live. The ship entered the reactor section and immediately began taking damage. Watched the determination's hull plates start to glow, then burn. The ship was never designed for this kind of punishment. It was dying just from being near the reaction. Field activated, Captain reported. Her voice was barely audible over the static. The reaction is, it's responding. We're seeing a decrease in the cascade rate. Throughout the station, the evacuation continued. People rushed toward docking bays and escape pods, most unaware of what was happening in the reactor section. But those who were watching began to understand. On its tablet, she could see the evacuation progress. 20,000 evacuated, 30,000. The numbers climbed steadily. The determination held its position in hell, its hull fracturing, its systems failing one by one. Hull breach in Section 3, engineer reported, her voice calm despite what that meant. Sealing it off, we're good. 50,000 evacuated, 60,000. Radiation levels are off the charts, Medic Park said. We're all dead already, biologically speaking, just waiting for our bodies to figure it out. 80,000, 100,000. Captain, said Pilot, the young one, I just want to say it's been an honor serving with you all. Honor's been mine, kid, Captain replied. Everyone else feel the same. A chorus of agreements came over the channel, felt something hot and wet on her face and realized she was crying. They didn't cry often. It was inefficient, but she couldn't stop. 150,000 evacuated. The reaction was still contained, but the determination was barely holding together. Could see pieces of the hull breaking away, turning to plasma in the antimatter storm. We're going to need to adjust position, Captain said. The field is starting to shift. This is going to hurt. The freighter moved deeper into the reaction and watched its forward section simply cease to exist, converted to energy. But the ship kept moving, kept adjusting, kept holding the field in position. "Still here," said. "Most of us anyway. Pilot is gone, the front of the bridge. It's just gone. 180,000 evacuated." "I can't feel my hands," engineer reported. "But the reactor controls are still responding. We can hold a little longer." "My mother would be proud," Wei said suddenly. "She was on the Morning Star. I think I finally understand why she stayed." His breath caught. She pulled up Wei's file. "Mother, doctor, medic, died during the station disaster." The file she had reviewed weeks ago during her investigation. 190,000 evacuated. "This is Navigator," said a woman's voice, speaking slowly as if each word took enormous effort. "I want everyone to know. It doesn't hurt, not really. We're past hurt. We're just tired." 200,000 evacuated. The last pods were launching, clearing the station's safety perimeter. "All clear," Captain said. "Everyone made it. 200,000 lives, that's pretty good." "Best day's work we ever did," agreed. The determination held position for 30 seconds longer, making sure the last evacuees were clear. Then the remaining containment fields failed simultaneously, and the antimatter reaction surged through the dying freighter. For an instant the ship was outlined in light, every detail visible in perfect clarity. Then it was gone, not destroyed, not exploded. Simply gone, converted to energy along with the 8 humans who had flown it into hell. The antimatter reaction, robbed of the determination's field to contain it, bloomed outward in a flash of light that briefly the gas giant below. Station 77 followed it into oblivion, torn apart by energies that could vaporize planets. But the evacuation fleet was already beyond the blast radius, carrying 200,000 people to safety. 200,000 people who were alive because 8 humans had died. Stood at the viewport for a long time, watching the empty space where the station had been. Around her, other observers gathered, word spreading about what had happened, about what the humans had done. The evacuation ships began organizing, preparing for the long journey to the nearest safe port. His tablet chimed with hundreds of messages. The council was convening emergency sessions. Media reports were spreading across the galaxy, but she ignored them all. Instead, she opened her investigation file and added 8 more names to the sacrifice registry. Captain Sarah, First Officer, Engineer, Pilot James, Navigator, Medic David Park, Cargo Specialist Maria Santos, Communications Officer Wei. She wrote a final report, her hand steady now. "I believed survival was the highest logic," she typed. "That any action that preserved life was correct, and any action that ended it was wrong. Humanity has shown me that I was thinking too small. Survival is not the highest logic. Purpose is. Meaning is. The capacity to choose what you die for because that choice determines what you lived for." She paused, then continued. "These 8 humans did not die because they valued their lives too little. They died because they valued other lives equally. They looked at 200,000 people and saw 200,000 reasons to act, and only 8 reasons to hesitate. And when they chose as humans always choose when faced with such mathematics. This is not madness. This is not dysfunction. This is perhaps the sanest, most rational thing in the universe. Because what is the point of survival if we survive only for ourselves? What is the point of consciousness if we cannot imagine ourselves in another's place? What is the point of civilization if we do not protect each other? Humanity has taught the galaxy a lesson we desperately needed to learn, that the willingness to die for others is not the opposite of valuing life. It is the highest expression of valuing life, because it means you value life itself more than you value your own continuation. Sent the report to the Galactic Council and then closed her tablet. She looked out at the stars, at the empty space where heroes had died, and she made a decision. She would propose a memorial at the galactic core, a place where every name from the sacrifice registry would be recorded, where species could come to remember those who had given everything so that others might live. And at the center, she would place the names of the 8 from the determination, as a reminder of what they had done and what they had taught. But more than that, she would propose something else. The principle, she would call it, a recognition that the capacity for self-sacrifice represented the highest form of sentient consciousness, that any species capable of voluntarily giving their lives for others had demonstrated something precious and profound. That humanity, whatever their flaws, whatever their quirks, had shown the galaxy what it truly meant to value life, not by living at any cost, but by being willing to pay the ultimate cost so that others could live. The evacuation fleet jumped to FTL, carrying its survivors toward safety, went with them, already composing her proposal, already imagining the debates it would cause. Some species would resist, others would embrace it. The galaxy would argue and discuss and eventually decide. But knew what her people would decide. They had always valued logic above all else, and the logic was inescapable. 8 lives had been traded for 200,000. The mathematics were perfect. What they were only beginning to understand was that the mathematics of sacrifice were not just about numbers. They were about meaning, about purpose, about the kind of universe you wanted to live in. Did you want a universe where everyone saved themselves, where survival was the only goal and the only victory? Or did you want a universe where people saved each other, where survival meant something because it was worth sacrificing for? Humanity had already answered that question. Now the galaxy would have to decide if it agreed. Looked at her reflection in the viewport and saw something she had never seen before. She saw someone who had been changed by what she witnessed, someone who understood that there were truths more important than survival, that there were choices more meaningful than self-preservation. She saw someone who had learned from humanity what it meant to be truly alive. And somewhere in the black, in the space between stars where 8 humans had died, their light still shone. Not the light of their dying ship which had faded in seconds, but the light of what they had done. The light of 200,000 lives saved. The light of a choice that showed the galaxy what humans were, what they had always been. Not death-seekers, not suicidal, not broken or mad. Just people who believed, truly believed, that some things were worth dying for, and that the people around you, all the people, strangers and friends and aliens and everyone, were among those things. The galaxy would remember the determination. It would remember Captain and her crew. And it would remember that when the moment came, when death was certain and the only choice was who would die, 8 humans had looked at the equation and chosen to die so that others would live. They had chosen as humans always chose. And the galaxy would never be quite the same.